Okay, this is Jeff Pooley, and I am addressing you remotely from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Of course, I wish we were all together on the coast of Australia, but I am grateful for Dave for organizing not just the original panel, but also pulling together this logistically complex remote substitute. And what I want to do is just take Dave's 5 questions and collapse them. And in the spirit of our subtitle, The Struggle is Real, to also draw upon a couple of experiences I've had on the ground with open access projects. One of them is Media Archive, which is the preprint server founded last year for the media, film, and communication research fields. And I think a couple of our other panelists are on that steering committee. The second project I've been involved in is a nonprofit open access book publisher that is fledgling and just getting underway. And in both cases, the project has bumped up against a problem that I've also written about. I'm going to try to circulate the URL, but what I've referred to here is the APC scourge. And as all of you know, APC stands for article processing charge. There is the equivalent for books, the book processing charge. And I've argued here, and you've heard it elsewhere too, that the APC essentially erects barriers for authors that had existed for readers. In this piece, I also outline a solution based on third-party library funding that is not in any way original, but just pulls together a series of initiatives. And so here in this brief presentation, I want to get a little bit more concrete and field specific and argue for an idea that's nothing more than that for a consortium for open access in media studies. And I'll get back to it in a moment. But before that, very, very quickly, just to reprise what I think is familiar to all of us, that the modern open access movement came about, depending on how you date it, in the early 2000s. And in spirit, if not in the letter of the Budapest Declaration, one major motivation was to break the stranglehold of the big 5 commercial publishing oligopolists, which in many ways look like the 5 or 6 big public-facing media companies that we used to show in octopus-like charts to our undergraduate students. One sad irony of open access as it's developed is that these companies have moved in to occupy lots of the revenue space, certainly, and much of the attention space as well, by giving open access a kind of bear hug. And the reason they've been able to do that is the emergence early on in the 2000s of the article processing charge, the idea that rather than charging readers, you would charge authors. And this grew up, it's a history that's outlined in the piece I presented before, but this grew up as a semi-arbitrary and not carefully thought out solution to the very real fact that publishing isn't free. And yet it began with natural science in the grant-funded Rich West in a way that completely ignored the barriers that non-natural scientists outside Europe and North America, that is to say, humanists and social scientists everywhere and scholars from the global South would never be able to pay APCs of any amount. And this sort of specter haunting the open science and open access movements is only getting worse, partly because the European Plan S that you've heard of is doubling down on the APC and had caved on caps for those and has gone all in on so-called read and publish deals. I've criticized those in another recent piece for accentuating global inequalities and essentially crowning Springer and Elsevier as the new OA royalty. Well, the solution that has been drawn for years now is to acknowledge that there's enough money in the system, that library budgets, perhaps also including government grants and funds from foundations, those dollars are more than enough to fund an infrastructure for scholarly communication that need not charge readers nor authors. And this has been demonstrated in a number of very successful experiments, initiatives like archive.org for physics and mathematics, computer science, the Open Library of Humanities, based in London, Knowledge Unlatched. Some of you may have heard of the successful pilots this year, very exciting, of the subscribe to open model of taking subscription journals and asking libraries to essentially keep the same subscription dollars flowing, but flipping the journals to open access. That's worked really, really well. And so in the spirit of that, I just want to briefly, in the 2 minutes or so that I have left, outline an idea for something field specific. And there's a reason why I think we could create a field version of these broader solutions to the APC problem. And this is to take what is essentially a coordination problem. There are libraries with budgets, right? And in the media and communication fields, they're often standalone libraries affiliated with standalone schools of communication and or media studies. To take those many, many libraries and the many, many publishers that do and might in the future exist and bring them together through a legal entity. And like I said, the idea is built on the model of existing initiatives, but this one would be specific to media and communication. And of course, it wouldn't be just libraries. Maybe you would include foundations and government funders, like the Muhlenberg Foundation, for example. And on the publishing side, of course, it wouldn't be just publishers. I have in mind here preprint servers like Media Archive. Libraries themselves are increasingly taking up publishing, so they should not be excluded on the publishing side. But the point is, this would be a legal entity that would be a kind of clearinghouse to take funds from libraries and other funders and seed them out to a nonprofit, perhaps, but in any event, open access and APC free funding landscape. And so if you imagine a kind of barbell shaped notion here, with the publishers on one side and libraries on the other, the consortium would be the bar in the middle. And the reason why we might be able to pull this off in our fields is that, especially in North America, the field was institutionalized often in standalone schools that have their own budgets, their own libraries, and therefore their own ability to make decisions about how to allocate library budgets. And so you can imagine something like a consortium working where the library members, the various institutions would be the governing body, and perhaps with an academic advisory board to help them make funding decisions. This is obviously just a skeletal idea, but the notion would be that you would have open access grantees that by definition have no author charges. You can imagine straight publishers that are media specific like Mason Press, or the longstanding publisher slash network Media Commons, or even preprint servers like Media Archive as recipients. And I want to acknowledge in this last moment that there are challenges, including sustainability ones, were something like this to be set up, the sort of year-to-year operational challenge of maintaining consistent funding. Questions about accountability are obvious, decision-making priorities, and even the core question of whether it makes sense to do something field-specific at all. Is that just balkanizing the broader open access movement, when in reality we need an academy-wide approach to harnessing library funds? Just a couple of practical questions. Would this be US only at launch? What kind of legal arrangements would be entailed? And would the grant recipients by necessity be nonprofit only, or would this be open to for-profit entities that otherwise meet the criteria? That's the idea. It's just a discussion item. I can't wait to hear what the rest of you are going to be talking about. No doubt the struggle is real. That's true too for the core issue of funding. Okay, thanks. Look forward to talking.